Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Workshop 5A, the Unfulfilled Promise of U.S. Citizenship for Intercountry Adoptees, What's Happening Today. Our presenter is Gregory Luce. He is a Minnesota-based attorney who was born and adopted in the District of Columbia. He works as a lawyer to secure identity and citizenship rights of all adopted people. He is the founder of the Adoptee Rights Law Center and the executive director of Adoptees United. So before we start, I just want to introduce myself. I am Annette O'Connell. I am Claudia's assistant. I'm part of the communications and conference team here at the AFF-CNY, and I am your moderator today. I just want to remind everyone, for the millionth time, training certificates are available for the conference. You must have your Zoom name listed exactly as you would like it to appear on your certificate. We will be issuing one certificate at the end of the conference for all of the hours for the workshops you attend. So please do wait to fill out the form until after the conference is complete. There are links for requests and links for the conference, for the certificate requests, in the chat box. And there's also other links that will guide you to our book table fundraiser and evaluations for the end also. Please know if you do have any questions during this workshop, you can feel free to put them in the chat. Greg and I are allowing time at the end of his presentation for questions. And we ask that you please keep your microphone muted now so that we can all hear Greg clearly. We are encouraging all workshop presenters, Greg, to add any handouts, slides, notes, anything that you're using, please add them into your event within the AFF-CNY network so that the people can continue the conversation. And I'm going to pass it off to you, Greg.
Thanks, Annette. And I work with Annette at Adoptees United and on a number of things as well as with Claude on activism across the U.S. So it's nice to be here, nice to talk to people, and nice to sort of dig into an issue that is, when you look at it closely, is very complicated. But when you actually go back a bit, it's really not complicated at all as to what we're dealing with. And that is U.S. citizenship for intercountry adoptees who are adopted by U.S. citizen parents when they were children. And I want to preface this by why, and many of you may not be intercountry adoptees, some may be, and I hope you are, and you can get some information from this presentation. But if you're not, or if you're not even adopted or at all, or you're related to adoption in some way, this is an incredibly important issue. And it's going to take people who are constituents to fix what I will be talking about. And constituents meaning people who vote, which intercountry adoptees without citizenship cannot, and contact their representatives to ask that this issue be fixed. And give me a second, and I'm going to be using a Google slide presentation to go through this with charts. I'm known for my charts. And hopefully break it down so you understand what the issue is from a very sort of micro level, but also we'll pull back and see what we can do from a constituent sort of macro level. So let me share a screen. And there we go. And then, all right, again, my name's Gregory Luce. I kind of wear two hats. I'm the executive director of Adoptees United, Inc., which is a national nonprofit organization. It's committed to equality for all adopted people. And similarly, the Adoptee Rights Law Center, which is a private law firm, and I'm a lawyer. I represent intercountry adoptees across the country. In fact, I'm going down to Houston next week and may go to Las Vegas in a month, and I'll be in San Diego, I think, in a few months. So I'm one of the few lawyers, if any, that specialize in this very specific area of intercountry adoptees without U.S. citizenship. But those are the two hats that I wear. I'm very proud of the work of Adoptees United, Inc. It's an organization that started in 2019, right before the pandemic, and it's going strong today with a lot of events. So look into that as we roll out new events each month. Before we get started, I work on behalf of intercountry adoptees. I sometimes speak for them in court or in legal papers, but I think the best voices are those who are impacted by it. And this is Monica Ross's story. She's a client of mine. She does not have U.S. citizenship, and she is engaged in advocacy on this issue. She lives in Baltimore, and she asked me to come out to meet her. Usually, I don't meet my clients until we get down to the interview process because they're all over the country and it's just expensive. But she asked that I come out and meet with her and record her letter that she wrote that we are using for advocacy. But I'll let her tell her story, and I can turn it up because I think the volume may be down a little bit. But let's go.
My name is Monica Ross. I'm writing to ask for your assistance in helping me and thousands of others in this world who have lived in the United States since being adopted as children. Some of us, as we get older, knew we were adopted. But who would have known or thought to ask our parents, or anyone else for that matter, about our citizenship? I guess my parents may have thought, since I arrived in the U.S. in 1960 and they were already U.S. citizens, I too was a citizen. That turned out not to be true. I'm an intercountry adoptee. I was raised like you. I had a sister, cousins, nephews, childhood friends. I was educated in the Catholic schools, went to high school and college. Adopted people like me went to school with you, worked with you, went to church with you, and may have served in the military with you. On September 19, 2019, a year after retiring from Social Security Administration, where I served the public for 23 years, my world got turned upside down. Real ID had been put into place in Maryland, and in order to renew my driver's license after 37 years of driving, I could not prove that I was a U.S. citizen. I cried, prayed, and had no idea how to get the documents the Maryland DMV requested from me. Not knowing what to do, I contacted an immigration attorney in Baltimore. She referred me to an attorney and advocate for adopted people in the United States. That attorney told me the first time at age 64 I was not a U.S. citizen. H.R. Bill 1593 and S 967, the Adoptee Citizenship Act of 2021, will allow me and thousands of adoptees like me to become U.S. citizens, some of who came to the United States more than 60 years ago. I'm requesting that you support me and the other adopted people like me. Please sign the letter and send it to your U.S. senators and or representatives. I need your support and your help to get Adoptee Citizenship Act passed. Support me and thousands of other adoptees who are in the same situation. Thank you for your consideration. Monica Ross, Baltimore, Maryland.
So that really tells the story, and people ask, how did this happen? Like what caused this so that when you're adopted by U.S. citizen parents, you're not automatically a citizen? And it's complicated, as you can see from the chart. And the chart gives you an overview of what current law is, essentially. And the biggest issue really is the age that was required when the U.S. passed a law in 2000 that would give citizenship to intercountry adoptees, but you had to be under 18 at the time. But if you, and so it excluded quite a number of people, thousands. The estimate is anywhere from 20 to 50,000 intercountry adoptees. But the chart also, excuse me, highlights other issues that essentially intercountry adoptees fall into the complex immigration system, which is probably the next most complicated area of law besides tax law in the United States. But the important thing for intercountry adoptees is that they're lawfully admitted to the U.S. What that means is that they are either have a visa of some sort or some sort of entry document, and that's really the top of the chart. But then after that, it really depends upon a lot of other things. And one is which, were they born after February 27th, 1983? And that's an important date to remember because you had to be under 18 as of February 27th, 2001. So which means that you had been born after February of 1983. You also had to be admitted on an immigrant visa. You couldn't come here on a tourist visa and become a U.S. citizen. And then it gets even more complicated after that. But the people in red, in the red dots, are the ones that are really falling through the cracks. Leo, Rachel, and Ray, and I'll talk about each one of them, as well as Maria down at the bottom, who is a citizen under current law, but has no proof of that. And that becomes a big issue as well. So just to back up a little bit, the immigrant visas are the key issue for adoptees arriving to the United States for adoption. And there's really two main ones, IR3 and IR4. And the saying goes, on IR3, you're free. And if you enter the country on an IR3 visa, you means that you already had a full and final adoption in the country of origin. And you automatically become a citizen so long as you're not too old. In IR4, there's more. That means you're coming to the United States to be adopted, and your adoptive parents finishing that adoption is the key to becoming a U.S. citizen. And what's happened over the years, and it still happens today, is adoptive parents didn't take that final step. And if they didn't take that final step, their children, as children, did not obtain U.S. citizenship. And when they become adults, they run into issues about citizenship and how they have to get it. There's also the IH3 and IH4, but those deal with countries that use the Hague Convention. So the overview of the issues are really, when I advise a client, is what's the client's current legal status? Like, how are they in the country? How do they enter the country? Immigrant visa, tourist visa, no visa whatsoever, no record? And what proof of that status exists? And then from there, once we see the documents and look at the documents, what path is available, if any, for U.S. citizenship? And then how are we going to be able to follow that path? How are we going to be able to do it? And it's very expensive. I mean, the fees for the USCIS, for the immigration services, are massive. If you want to naturalize, it's $725 fee. If you are already a citizen and you just want proof through a certificate of citizenship, it's $1,170. And that's just the filing fee. It doesn't include attorney's fees. I for most part of my services to my clients are either pro bono, probably the majority of cases, or low bono, meaning it's like a small flat fee. This is what's working in our current system. It means that the child, as an adopted child, lawfully admitted to the U.S., they're born after February 27th, 1983. They're admitted on an immigrant visa, and their adoption was finalized if it needed to be finalized in the U.S. And then, of course, you need to, for some, there may be an added step of getting a certificate of citizenship, and we'll talk about that a little bit. This is what's broken. One, you weren't born on or before February 27, 1983. You're too old to become a citizen. That's the vast majority of where people are, and that's the focus of legislation to fix it. Two, you're admitted on a non-immigrant visa, tourist visa, or a visitor visa, or sometimes a business visa. Or three, the adoption is not finalized in state court. Those are the big issues. The age-based requirement is going to be fixed if we pass the Adoptee Citizenship Act. Number two and number three are not. Those loopholes will still exist. And those are things that we're going to have to be aware of and watch out for especially on the IR4 visas, the ones where you have to finalize the adoption in the US in order to obtain US citizenship. These are some of my representative clients. And I represent clients in all sorts of situations. Some just need to get their documents to see what their status is, and then I can inform them, yes, you are a citizen, but you're gonna need to get proof. So I just use Maria, Ray, Rachel, and Leo. These aren't real names of my clients, but they are actual clients. And in fact, there may be many like Ray, there may be many like Maria. There's very few like Leo, and there's a few like Rachel. And I'll talk about each one of them. Maria, so this issue affects those who are already citizens but can't prove it. That's like Maria. So typically they have an identification document problem. They need to obtain real ID. To obtain real ID, you need to prove that you are a US citizen. To prove that you are a US citizen, you generally need to show that you were born in the US with just a regular birth certificate that US citizens have, if they're citizens by birth, or a passport, or a certificate of citizenship. And if you don't have those, you're in a world of hurt. And this is disproportionately affecting clients who are low income and don't have the resources to obtain a passport or a certificate of citizenship. And therefore, because they can't get adequate identification, they can't work. So it's sort of this, it's a loophole that they're caught in. And so the law and the bill in place now is not going to fix that, but it is an issue we all need to be aware of. And then there's Leo, who, in my case, for instance, who was literally carried across the border between Mexico and the U.S. after an adoption in Mexico. And so there's no record of entry into the U.S. And so without a record of entry into the U.S., he's going to have to figure out how to establish that he's lawfully present. And then he's going to have to adjust status to get a green card. And then after a green card, he's going to have to naturalize. So it's a long, hard, complicated process. We're in that process now. I don't know if it's going to be successful because it's very tough to do all of those, especially, as we'll find out in some of my other cases, if the client has voted believing that they were a U.S. citizen or committed a criminal act that would typically lead to deportation. But that's Leo, and there's another client who was essentially smuggled into the country from Brazil, and has the same issue.
Greg, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You said, especially if they voted thinking they were a US citizen, I would assume many of these people have voted because they thought they were US citizens, right?
Yes, it's pretty common in almost every one of my cases. They don't find out, like Monica, they don't find out until way later in life that they are not a US citizen.
So then that becomes what, like a criminal act? Is that like, why is that important, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
So it can be a criminal act. It's generally not charged out. I mean, although the atmosphere in the US could change. But you are considered inadmissible and ineligible to become a US citizen if you voted when you are not a citizen. And luckily for adopted people and others, there's an exemption, and you have to show that you reasonably believed that you are a US citizen when you voted, and that your parents have to be either naturally born US, your natural parents either have to be US citizens or your adoptive parents have to be US citizens. Now it gets even more complicated. So remember how I talked about the IR4 visas who arrived here for the purposes of adoption, and then they were never adopted legally in the US. And the only issue they have is they need to naturalize. The only way they can become a citizen is a naturalization. The question there becomes, well, who are that person's parents? If they were never legally adopted, are their parents back in Bolivia? Or are their parents the ones that raised them in the US? And that exemption may not apply. And so it gets really dicey for many intercountry adoptees who reasonably believe that they are citizens because I was adopted by U.S. citizen parents, or I was cared for by U.S. citizen parents, and they told me I was a U.S. citizen, and therefore they may have issues with becoming a U.S. citizen through naturalization. That's not an if they fix it with what's in Congress now, that's not an issue. Not an issue at all.
But isn't that more neglect on the part of the government? Like when people are registering to vote, shouldn't that be something that had been caught?
Well, I mean, maybe today when everyone's looking at qualifications to vote, but unlikely in the past. You go to the DMV and the DMV recorder says, "Hey, do you want to just check this box and want to vote?" Boom, you've been registered to vote, which is a violation of immigration law. Or your parents telling you that you're a citizen, you should be able to vote. In the case of Leo, his father said, "I want you. You're a citizen. You should use your power to vote," and drilled into my client that he should be voting. It wasn't that hard to register to vote, and also the issue is, you have some of these documentation show you're adopted by U.S. citizen parents. DMV people don't know that. They figured, like we do, that if you're adopted by U.S. citizen parents, you're a citizen, and turns out that's not true. So there becomes issues even within what government officials are telling them that they are a U.S. citizen when they are not. So, for instance, there's a client in New York who contacted me and said that she is unsure what her citizenship status is, and had contacted her representative in Congress to ask about what she should do. And that representative said, "Well, you are a citizen. You just need to file the N-600 to get a certificate of citizenship, and that's going to take a filing fee of $1,170. Had she done that, she would have been rejected and lost that money because she is not a citizen. But again, U.S. government officials believed that she was. And it shows the depth of this issue that people don't fully understand. Even people have contacted immigration authorities. The immigration authorities have told them that they are a U.S. citizen when they're not. I've been in interviews with immigration authorities who thought my client, after I've been dealing with this case for a year, thought my client was already a citizen. And I had to tell them in a weird way that, no, my client is not a citizen. That's why we're here. So it goes into the whole presumption of the fiction of adoption itself. That is, if you are adopted, you are as if born to. And that's certainly not the case for citizenship issues for intercountry adoptees. So someone like Leo, I'm just going to show how complex his process would be to what's called adjust status. So he doesn't have a lawful admission. He's not lawfully present in the U.S. He could be deported. There's this long process just to get to at the very end, that LPR, that's the green card, in which he would even have to get a waiver, travel back to the country of origin, and then be interviewed at the consulate in, let's say, Mexico, which takes years and years and years, and then a new visa issued, and then he could get his green card when he came to the U.S. So it's extremely complicated and very stressful for clients. And that's Leo. That's the ones that the law really is not going to, the bill's not going to fix. And then we have Ray and Rachel. These are probably the vast majority of my clients. I'll talk about Rachel first. Whoops. And the difference between the two are really how they entered the country. Ray entered on an immigrant visa and he's adopted in state court. You would think that he'd be a citizen. And Rachel entered on a non-immigrant visa, was still adopted in state court, which is a little weird. You're not lawfully present at the time of adoption, but still the state court said, sure, we'll let you adopt. But she's going to have a much harder process at this point. Ray represents a vast majority of clients, or vast majority of people who are dealing with this issue. Let's talk about Rachel real quick, though. She entered on a non-immigrant visa. She was born in the 70s, so she's too old. And the adoption is finalized in state court. So if you look at the back at the chart, she was lawfully admitted. She was not born after February 27th, 1983, but she was not also admitted on an immigrant visa. So she's now considered an overstayed visa and can be removed from the country. She's not a legal permanent resident. She doesn't have a green card. If she leaves the U.S. and tries to come back, she could be potentially permanently banned from coming back. Her employment status is very tenuous, and when she applies for a new position with employment, it becomes very difficult to obtain that job. So she has a lack of a long-term ability to self-support. She may have benefited from what was the bill. The bill is still in Congress, but will not benefit from a current proposal that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then you have Ray, who represents probably the majority of the clients that I can actually help. He's born in 74. He's lawfully admitted on an IR4 visa. IR4 means you need to do more. And thankfully, he had a final adoption in state court. So he became a legal permanent resident when he entered the country. But his issue is that he's too old. He was not born after February 27th, 1983. And this represents probably 30,000 to 50,000 people. If part of the issue is he didn't have any documentation, which is not unusual. So it took a few months to get all the documentation that he needed. One of the issues is that his date of birth for his green card does not match the certificate of foreign birth that he got from his state of adoption. That typically is not an issue. There is a federal law saying you must go by the court document, but that created problems still with identity documents. He's estranged from his adoptive parents, and he's employed at poverty wages and can't afford an attorney nor the filing fees to naturalize. So the process really, and this sort of goes through the process of what I do with my clients. I agreed to represent them pro bono. I filed what's called a G639. This is critical. And that is a Freedom of Information Act request for all of his documents with the immigration authorities. I petitioned the state court for records to make sure that we can prove the adoption. I had to assess whether he's voted or not, and thankfully he had not. And then the first thing we did was to renew his green card because he didn't have one for decades because he only had one when he was a child and assumed that he was a citizen. And he could either wait for Congress to fix this, or he could seek naturalization. And that's really the big issue right now. Do I wait to see if Congress fixes this, or do I naturalize now? And that's going to be that decision is going to depend on a number of things. And one is cost. Does he have $725? Or does he need to hire an attorney? And luckily, I'm representing him for free. Does he have a voting record? Does he say anywhere when he's applied for a job that he is a U.S. citizen? And does he have any prior criminal convictions which may put him at risk for deportation? All of those issues, voting record, employment representations, prior criminal convictions, go away if pending legislation is passed. You don't have to, they're not going to look into those issues. People like Ray who have a prior criminal conviction and he was at one point put into removal or deportation proceedings for a theft charge involving, I think, $2,000. I would not recommend that he tries to now, because he probably would not be able to. And that's quite a number of clients who have some sort of involvement with the criminal justice system that may prevent them from becoming an actual U.S. citizen, even though they should be, because they're adopted by U.S. citizen parents. And and what's happened in the past, and I think people do know this, that a number of adopted people, adult adopted, intercountry adoptees have been deported. Quite a number to South Korea, but also to other countries all over the world. And those generally relate to a criminal conviction that made them deportable.
Hey, Greg,
Yeah.
quick question. So you said 30 to 50,000 were in Ray's shoes. Just as an idea, like what are the big numbers that we're looking at? Because this is a huge number of people that are stuck, correct? It's huge.
So 30, what did they said 30 to 1,000,
30
to
to
50,000.
50,000 like Ray.
Right. So yeah, I would say that the vast majority of, and it's hard to get the numbers because they don't track the actual finishing of the adoption. They track the issuance of visas, but that doesn't mean the adoption actually occurred. But Adoptee Rights Campaign did a lot of research before, and some of the numbers you'll see on here represent that research. And they came up with a range between 20 to 60,000. So it's really hard to say how many, but it is a great number. I mean, if you look at the overall, how many children came to the U.S. for adoption, either they are already adopted in the country of origin or they're coming here to be adopted in state court, it's anywhere from 400,000 to 500,000 over the course of the last, 50, 60 years, even more, about 80 years. And that's what this chart shows. So it shows sort of the growth of intercountry adoption over the years from its sort of beginning in the mid 40s until about now, which according to Adoptee Rights Campaign, and these numbers are fairly close to what the Department of State has. We're talking 400 to 500,000 adoptees have been adopted by U.S. citizen parents. And so you'll see also on this chart in 1983, which is sort of this key year, there were about 104,000 had been adopted by that time. Now, even though they were adopted in 83, obviously it means that they were born before 83, but it could also mean those who were adopted in 87 were born before 1983 as well, if they were adopted at age 5. So we're talking, it impacts, within that group, it impacts quite a number of them because that adoption had to be finalized in a state court in order to, and you had to be naturalized in order to obtain citizenship. So if the parents didn't take care of that, and that's where a lot of the neglect is, or the agency said, no, you're all good, there's nothing more you have to do, then they didn't secure citizenship. And I hear from people every week who are in that situation. So I don't have any doubts that the number is large. Just based on, I hear every week from someone new who has this issue. Now, I should point out, in the green circle, the Child Citizenship Act, that was passed in 2000 to fix part of this issue. And why I say part is that this is the act that we're trying to amend now. And because that act, passed in 2000, effective February 27th, 2001, is the one that said you must be younger than 18 years of age as of the effective date. So basically, you had to be born before February 27th, 1983. There have been efforts to fix that over the course of the last at least 5 years. The Adoptee Citizenship Act of 2015, 2017, 2019, and 2021. It has not advanced. It still has not advanced this year in 2021 or 2022 now. But where we are now, sort of what's happening today, is in a complicated maneuver. The House of Representatives added provisions to an unrelated huge technology bill, but the provision they added would close that loophole and make it so that it didn't matter how old you were, as long as you were adopted prior to your 18th birthday. It doesn't matter if it was you were born in 1960 or 1970. That's been added to the House bill, and the Senate companion bill does not have that in it. Both bills have passed, and now 107 members of Congress are negotiating to see what goes into that bill. Now, do the adoptee citizenship provisions go into that bill, which is on the House side, or are the senators, especially like Chuck Grassley, who don't want any immigration provisions in this technology bill, he's anti-immigrant, will the Senate side prevail and nothing happens? Doesn't mean that we're out of luck. We could come back to the Adoptee Citizenship Act of 2021 and try to pass that, but it's just not looking, that's just not looking good. And it just seems like, how can we not do this? How can we ignore this issue, which is so easy to fix? What is it about adopted people that do not get the attention they deserve? There's a lot of answers to that. One is, well, for many of us, no one really cares about you when you're an adult. They care about you when you're a baby or an infant or a toddler, and especially didn't care about you as an adult immigrant. And that's how you're defined as an intercountry adoptee. You're an immigrant. And as Chuck Grassley often says, I don't want criminals becoming citizens. And that's how he frames the issue. He sees all adult adoptees who have been deported or who are have issues in order to naturalize as criminals. And so that's what we're caught up in what's often called the crimmigration system, where there's a punishing avenue within the immigration system if you have committed certain crimes, and the criminal justice system is not supportive in any way. So that's what we're dealing with politically, and why it may not move again this year. And which is sad, because with these large numbers, I can only take one at a time. I'm doing client by client by client. And people like Monica, for instance, they deserve citizenship. I mean, they've been here for most of her life, since 1960. It's just crazy. I think Monica could naturalize. She has, like many others, a voting issue. Very proud voter. She voted, for years. And so it would take convincing immigration field officer that she reasonably believed she was a citizen. But it also is a cost to her, a filing fee. The other thing I have done, which the adoptee community has been really, really great, is that when these fees come up, these filing fees, I'll ask the community to pitch in and to contribute $25, $50 towards these filing fees, and that's been really successful. So that, combined with the pro bono representation and adoptee community pitching in, for the most part, it's been free. Not for all adopted people, but for a lot of, at least for my clients. But I do think we need a legal clinic that offers pro bono representation to adult adoptees without U.S. citizenship. And this will be critical even if this act passes. Because even if this act passes, there's still a lot of legal maneuvers you're going to have to make in order to get proof of citizenship, just like Maria, who has issues with identification documents that she needs in order to prove that she's a citizen. So that clinic would hopefully also be able to represent adoptees who would benefit from the Adoptee Citizenship Act, and get them on that path to citizenship and secure proof of that citizenship, either with a passport or with a certificate of citizenship. I think a lot of you are in New York. These are the New York House representatives that are on the conference committee that's trying to negotiate whether this adoptee citizenship provision stays in the bill. So those of you in New York, I encourage you to contact these representatives or your representative in general and say, this is an important issue for me. I want this taken care of, because it's ridiculous that intercountry adoptees who are adopted by U.S. citizen parents do not have current U.S. citizenship. I think in the chat we'll put sort of sample language you can use. You could, if you have your own story, you can add it to it. But
I just put it in there.
okay, I always have two things that you ask your representative. One is you want their support for a bill. And two is, please let me know your position on this issue. You know, I've had various luck with representatives getting back to you about that, but I think when there's enough support from people contacting their reps, they start to understand that it's an issue in their community. So I would encourage you to contact your representatives, whether you're in New York or any other state. And I think there's a link in the chat as well that could tell you a couple of ways to do that. Let's see if I have it. Nope. One is if you go to adopteerightslaw.com/Monica, it has some actions that you could take. Just click on some links and you can tweet out some things to senators or figure out a way to contact your senator, because it's really going to happen on the Senate side at this point. It has House support. The House put it in their bill, the Senate did not, and the Senate has people like Chuck Grassley who are just opposed to any kind of immigration reform. So if we can put pressure on senators, especially Senator Schumer, because he holds the key to the Senate, he may be a good target, is to write to Senator Schumer and say, this is an important issue. We need to take care of this. It's way overdue. Let's put it in the bill and be done with it. Here's where you could reach me. And I know I'm probably finishing up a little bit early. I was a little concerned about that. But my wife told me this morning, well, no one really complains about a presentation ending early. But I'm certainly open to discussion. And then let me get off the screen share.
Greg, do you want me to talk about when I contacted my representative about
Yeah,
it?
and so that would be really helpful. I mean, you had some help from an advocacy group that's no longer really doing that, but I think it was critical what you did, and if you could tell people about that. That would
Yeah, and again, the group that I was working with when I did this is no longer active. But really, I emailed, my representative is Sean Patrick Maloney. I emailed his office stating that I was an adopted person, stating that New York had recently changed its legislation regarding adoptee rights for domestically born adopted people. And I said exactly what's going on with the Citizenship Act, you know, that we have people who have been deported. Specifically, we have at least one former New York State resident who has been deported. And I said that, you know, I needed to talk to his office, that I wanted to know exactly what Greg had said, right? I want to know what your position is, and I want to know where you stand. And I requested a Zoom meeting. And one of his legislative aides got back to me almost immediately and said, well, you know, that the representative is in support of immigration. And I said, but you're missing the point. I know that he's in support of immigration, but this is an entirely different issue. And at that point, the next response I got was, yeah, we're going to have a meeting, because it was kind of like an aha, come to Jesus moment, I guess, for them. Like, what are you talking about? So they set up a Zoom meeting, not with the representative himself, but with his legislative aide. And we had a whole conversation about it. And he was horrified by it. He had people that he knew in his personal realm who were adopted, some who were actually intercountry adoptees. And Greg, what was it, like within a couple of days, right? We had a commitment that Maloney was going to sign on as a co-sponsor and advocate for passage of this legislation. But the key takeaway here is that, you know, our representatives are civil servants, right? They work for us. We have to tell them what our positions are and have the conversations with them. My mother used to tell me that democracy is not a spectator sport. So, you know, if this is something that you feel firmly about, then really you need to contact your legislators, your federal legislators, and your state legislators. Because, you know, our state legislators work collectively on many issues with our federal ones. So, contact all of your legislators and see what their status is on it, what they feel about it. Request, we're still living in this virtual world. You don't have to go to someone's local office. You don't have to, do anything like that. Actually request a virtual meeting, either with your representative or with someone from their staff. Because once you do that and once you get their ear, a lot of these people, again, we saw it with the OBC legislation too. They just have this like deer in the headlights look sometimes, and they do get this like come to Jesus moment. Like, what are you talking about that this is going on? Because many people don't know that it is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think what's so frustrating is that we don't, and I think this is why we get such different responses from immigration or from representatives or from anyone, is people, including intercountry adoptees, don't know what kind of issue this is. Is it a family issue? Is it an immigration issue? Is it a foreign policy issue? And US law says it's an immigration issue, and that's where we're stuck. But we're also stuck in an immigration system that is broken, an immigration system that is almost impossible to reform because of anti-immigrant sentiments. And and a lot of the intercountry adoptees I work with don't identify as immigrants at all, but are defined as in that way. And so it's going to take people who are not impacted to rally our senators and our representatives to fix this. I mean, there are good advocate organizations that are run by impacted individuals, but they're not going to be able to do it all themselves. And they're trying. They've been trying for years. And I'm concerned that this year, this is the furthest we've gotten to see a bill that's actually, or a provision that's in a bill that's actually passed one of the House. But I'm concerned now that it's not going to do anything in the Senate. So it really does. I would encourage you to share information about this to people you know, talk to them. Most people, when you tell them this, that yes, they were adopted as children by U.S. citizen parents, but they're not U.S. citizens, they're shocked. They just can't believe it. And so I would,
Because adoption is meant to be as if born to, and as
Right.
if born to should never lead to deportation. It should never
Right.
lead to deportation.
right. One of the issues is if this act or this provision passes, can we bring back the people who have already been deported? And I read the law or the bill that would allow that, but the logistics of it are very complicated. And that relates to the logistics of getting travel documents in order to come to the U.S. after they've been deported. But I hold out hope that it stays as is and is added to the Senate side, and then we've got a whole different legal avenue, which is still going to take resources to fix. My hope is that Monica obtained citizenship before her husband dies. Her husband's in his 90s, and I'd like to see her obtain that. It may just be that we're going to have to go forward with naturalization if this doesn't pass, and we'll go from there.
How many clients do you think you've represented, Greg, for this particular issue of it?
That's hard to say. I mean, there's full-on representation where I'm just all in. There's a lot of people I advise and say this is what you have to do. It's gone over 100 at this point, probably. But it's the sort of core full-in representation where I'm traveling all over the country. Probably 25 to 30.
Okay.
Yeah, and almost all of those are pro bono, except for I asked the, and this is another thing, I asked the clients to pay the travel costs because I'm not gonna. Well, I didn't with Monica when she wanted me to come out there to record that, but it was nice to meet her too. She's a powerhouse.
I put that in the chat, how humble you are that you don't always say that you do these cases pro bono.
Right. I mean, I think part of, I mean, I make an important point on that though, because I think, within the adoptee space, getting paid is such a weird thing. people for some reason don't trust you if you're paid for anything related to adoption. And so we constantly, this is a whole different story, but we're constantly undervaluing who we are and what we do. And that's part of what Adoptees United is trying to change, is that we value our time. We value those who participate in our panels. And so we pay them a small honorarium to do that. But yeah, so I do tell people I do pro bono work or low bono work. I make it a point to do though, because I don't want to be seen as someone who's taking advantage of adoptees or in a tight spot. Yeah. But what I would love to see is a clinic, as I said, a clinic that's funded, that has 2 or 3 attorneys or recruits attorneys all over the country that can do these cases for free. And then we have a fund available to pay for the filing fees that are required of adoptees. So whether we can find that funding or not, I don't know. People look at us again as adults, and it's like, well, I don't really care about you as an adult adopted person. I cared about you when you were an infant or a toddler or in foster care. And even in foster care, they didn't care so much.
Shaman, feel free to unmic and ask your question.
Greg, let's pretend as though I don't understand very much about law. I always equate this stuff to medical billing. I just don't, it just doesn't equate very well. So say, for instance, we support many families that do international adoption or have adopted over the last 20 years or 10 or whatever. In, I'll say layman's terms, what are kind of things that you would recommend us having those families know? What kind of things do we bring up to them, and so that way they don't hit this? What if you know someone who is internationally adopted 30 years ago, and did you ever check this? Or for a layman like me, what kind of things do we need to bring up? Did they ever check what kind of things? I hope I'm asking that. This is the very dumbed down for someone like me question.
Well, the biggest issue is, I mean, this is a hard question to ask, especially the individual, maybe not the adoptive parent so much, but it's very inappropriate question to say, are you a citizen? But you know, if I'm an adopted person, and there are a lot of intercountry adoptee groups that have that ability to ask that question. And so for the intercountry adoptee, him or herself or themselves, I would try to get them into a group that understands this issue, or you could just refer them to Adoptee Rights Law Center.
What about like, say, for instance, you're working with adoptive families that are that you're able to ask this question of,
right,
and it's not an inappropriate, disrespectful question. So say, for instance, you are working with them. Is there anything that would, gee, did you check the something?
Well, I would just ask the upfront question: does your child have a certificate of citizenship?
Okay.
Because that's the key.
Okay.
I mean, and the differences between that and a passport can get revoked.
Okay.
It can get revoked if you are in arrears on child support, or if there's certain crimes you committed, you can have your passport revoked. And I have a client whose passport was revoked, and he's having a hell of a time getting his certificate of citizenship now. So had his parents done that and obtained a certificate of citizenship, then he'd have a much easier time. So I would ask either, do you have a certificate of naturalization or a certificate of citizenship for your child? And if not, and they're already an adult, ask them to contribute funds to help make that happen, because they neglected it. I mean, that's bottom line.
Okay.
They should have known. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And you've said this before, Greg, you've cited what specific people or organizations you feel were neglectful in making this happen. Can you tell us who they are? Like, I've heard you say, because I work with you, obviously.
The specific organizations?
Yeah, well, not specific, but like, you know, you said like it was either the parents who were neglectful,
Right.
agencies, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a number. It could be a whole series. Like, for instance, let's say you're adopted from Colombia. This is a client. The Colombian authority, the adoption authority, told the parents, there's nothing left that you need to do. You're good. Your son's a citizen. So the parents listened to that and didn't take any further action, and they probably should have known better. And so there's neglect on that end as well, or it could be the U.S. based adoption agency that's overseeing, or is within the states as an accredited agency, and they say something like, "Well, finalizing the adoption is just an optional thing that you need to do." And I've heard that too. It's not optional if it's an IR4 visa, or the certificate of citizenship is just an optional expense for you of $1,170. It's not optional. I mean, technically it kind of is optional. You can just do a passport, but the passport is not worth as much as the certificate of citizenship, which is really the permanent document. So it's a government that's neglectful, because the government hasn't taken care of this. The government has said, you are too old to become a citizen because you're an adult, but we'll give it to kids. And the government's neglectful and not addressing it. So it's this whole series of neglectful acts on the part of the government, adoption agencies, whether foreign or domestic, and adoptive parents.
And what about adoption attorneys? Shouldn't they be versed in this type of thing if they're handling an intercountry adoption? Shouldn't they either know now or have known then? Obviously, specifically for those who are impacted by this, shouldn't the attorneys have known that needed to be done?
Yeah, they definitely should have. I mean, I haven't run across many where it's a private adoption only involving an attorney. But I think the attorney would say the same thing. It's like, well, you could pay the $1,170 for a certificate of citizenship, but you don't have to. Passport's just as good,
Right.
which it's not. Or there are certainly, I mean, I'm in such a tiny niche area of the law representing adult adoptees without U.S. citizenship that even attorneys don't know. Immigration attorneys, long experienced immigration attorneys, have no clue how to handle these cases and tell clients the wrong thing.
That's crazy.
And so it could be that they're just wrong. So
Kylie,
yeah,
do you
it's
wanna
a sort of
unmic?
it's a
Sorry, go ahead.
spiraling series of neglect that could be fixed by a few lines of a bill.
Right.
Seriously.
Kylie, do you want to unmute or do you want me to ask your question? If you don't want to unmute, you can just put in
No,
chat.
I mean, I have no problem, but sorry, I just realized, Claudia, you have your hand up and I don't want to speak over you. Okay, so this might be a question that I should kind of explore on my own because maybe I don't understand obtaining passports further than my own process, but just, I guess, can you speak a little bit more and more specifically to the passport issue for international adoptees? Because in the example that you gave, that adoptee's passport was revoked. But how did they obtain one without proof of citizenship in the first place? Because from what I understand, do you not have to show proof of citizenship even to obtain a passport? Or am I misunderstanding?
No. It's a great question. So if you acquire citizenship under the current law, let's say that my client he was born in the mid 80s. And so when he came here on an immigrant visa, and his adoption was finalized in state court. So he could take his documentation to the passport office and say, here is my green card, and here is the adoption decree, and here's how old I am and when I was born. And the passport office could issue a passport based upon that proof. Those are the documents that prove citizenship. Or he could use the same documentation to obtain a certificate of citizenship, which is what I always recommend to every client. Is you must get a certificate of citizenship and get both a passport card, one that you can carry around with you, and a passport book. Because the passport book and the certificate of citizenship, until you need them for something, just put that away in a secure area, a safe or whatever, and then carry the proof of citizenship of the passport card with you. I think that's a great way. I have one myself, actually, because I think it's really handy. But yeah, it's a great question as to, that all depends upon the documentation of proof that you might be able to take to the passport office and then have a passport issued. You can't do that if you're not old enough. I mean, if you're too old. Yeah. For that, you aren't a citizen and you have to naturalize. Yeah.
Can you touch on also why some even domestic adopted people are having trouble, myself included,
Well,
getting a passport?
yeah, I mean, that has to do with how birth certificates are handled for domestic adoptees, and those, there's two issues really. One are delayed certificates, so that if your amended certificate is considered delayed by more than a year, the Department of State may need additional documentation to prove that you are who you are. And so they'll look carefully at these delayed certificates. I think, Annette, you have one, don't you?
Sorry, I was still on mute. Yeah, because there's between the issue date and the file date, they only want it to be 12 months.
Right.
So mine is 22 months because the adoption wasn't finalized until I was 22 months old. But then, then you think about foster kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're not being adopted until, let's say a foster child isn't being adopted until they're 12, there's going to be a 12-year difference there.
Right.
And this becomes an issue. And I would imagine with intercountry adoptees, could also be an issue, right? Because if you have someone who was adopted from Ukraine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're brought here, the process isn't finalized when they're brought here from Ukraine, right? It's still a process. So if they're born in Ukraine, brought to the United States at 2 months old, it's still a legal process that has to take place. So there might be a 12-month or longer gap there on their certificate.
Possibly, but it's a little different. Like, I'll use Ukraine and South Korea. Ukraine, the requirement in Ukraine, you have to have full and final adoption in the country of origin. So you have to full and final in Ukraine, which means under current law, when you enter the country as an immigrant as a legal permanent resident, you automatically become a U.S. citizen, and the Department of or USCIS will send you the certificate of citizenship automatically. Now didn't start happening until 2004, I believe. So there's this gap in between. Then I find this with a lot of Chinese intercountry adoptees, that they came in, let's say, 2000, and they didn't have a process to give them the automatic certificate of citizenship. So they had to apply for it. But it is automatic in the IR3s currently. IR4s, that's South Korea. For the most part, South Korea has changed in recent years. Yeah, you're going to have an issue if your adoption is not full and final in the U.S. because it wasn't in Korea. The one other thing, there were two issues with the original birth certificates and the domestic adopted people, and that has to do with, again, with immigration. For a number of years, and I think it's still going on, if you're born near the border with Mexico and adopted, and then you apply for a passport as a U.S. citizen, they will ask for your original birth certificate if your amended does not have the institution where you were born. And most amendeds don't. And in Texas, your birth certificate is sealed, and you can't get it unless you know the names of the people on it or by court order. So, and this was because of midwives in border towns that were used for births, and small number had essentially fraudulently issued birth certificates related to where the child was born. So born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. Not born in the U.S., you're not. And so that's impacted now everyone who's born and adopted, but born in a border town like El Paso or anywhere. And suddenly they can't get a passport unless they unseal their original birth certificate and show that they were actually born in a hospital, or they weren't born using a midwife that was on this list of fraudulent transactions. So that's a little crazy, but again, caught up in the immigration system as well.
It's a little crazy.
I have a stupid question based on and this is just my logic, Greg, so just humor me for a second. So international adoptee comes over from another country, don't even care which one, right? They get to New York. Parents finalize the adoption in New York. New York, because the adoption is finalized, is going to issue a New York State birth certificate for this person, correct?
Certificate, they call it
Do they get an OB, like would they get an amended birth certificate?
they get what's in most states you get a certificate of foreign birth.
So
which
it's
on it-
not an amended, like they're not, so the New York domestic law that says seal the original OBC and issue an amended an ABC when you're adopted does not happen if it's an international.
No, it doesn't
Ah,
happen.
See, that's so illogical.
Yeah, and also the original birth certificate, if it exists, is typically in the immigration files,
Right.
or it might be in the court files, and sometimes it's just a certificate of abandonment. But they get a special, I say special, certificate of foreign birth, or sometimes they're called certificate of foreign, it's a certificate of birth data. But it does show that they were born to their adoptive parents, but they were born in a different country.
So if
And
If
so they
someone-
don't get an OB, they don't get like they don't get an American birth certificate in any which way or form, even though we falsify birth certificates in domestic adoption, we will not falsify them in any way or form for international adoptions. Interesting. Okay.
Well, yeah, and I think the reason is that if you have a birth certificate saying that you were born in the U.S., then you're automatically a citizen. Yeah.
So for the
I
certificate,
mean, I guess that could be a fix. Anyone who is internationally or is adopted from another country, they get a new birth certificate, just like we do as adopted domestic, and
Right.
it shows that we were born in the U.S. Then you would get citizen. That's not going to happen, though, unfortunately.
so the certificate of foreign birth, the adoptive parents are still listed as parents, as in a domestic adoption?
Yeah, as the birth parents. Yeah.
They're still listed as birth. Okay, so now let's say we can't amend a foreign document, they get an amended foreign birth certificate. Pamela is saying in chat. We can't amend a foreign document, they get an amended foreign birth certificate. Right, that's what you said.
Yeah, that's
right?
just you can't
Right.
amend if there is an original birth certificate from the country of origin, you can't amend that unless you go to the country of origin.
Right.
But they don't even call it an amended foreign birth certificate. It's just a certificate of foreign birth. Yeah.
So if an intercountry adoptee wants to learn who their birth parents are, can they foil their records, or is that state contingent? Like, how would they go about trying to obtain their original birth record? Is that even possible?
No, it's actually a really interesting comparison. So between domestic and intercountry, you would do a Freedom of Information Act request to immigration authorities, that's USCIS, requesting what's called the alien file. That's everything that they have on you as an immigrant. And in that file can be a lot of documents. Almost always the home studies are in there. Interviews with the adoptive parents are in there. And there could be a birth certificate in there, depending. And a developing issue, I believe, is when they try to redact information off a birth record or withhold it completely. And, I know people say, well, birth certificates are not a federal issue. Well, I don't know. I think it could be a federal issue if the USCIS is redacting information off a birth record of someone who's not, to protect someone who's not a citizen, actually. So the birth mother's not a citizen, and they're getting more rights than the person who is a citizen, the adoptee. So I think that's going to be an interesting issue to explore. And I'm talking with a couple of adoptees about the legalities of redacting information that really should be theirs.
So
But-
I have a friend who was adopted from Russia, who says that they don't have a birth certificate, but they're saying they don't have a birth certificate because that's what their adoptive parents have said all along. So I should recommend then that he do a FOIA request.
They should definitely do a FOIA. I mean, I think those documents are so valuable as an adopted person, that when I do a FOIA for a client and I get the records back, I look at them really quickly to see what their status is, and then I forward them on to the client, because these are really personal documents that may rock their world, and they should be the first to see them.
And
then
that's
after they get a chance to look through them and see them, then we start to talk about what the next steps are. But
And
yeah,
that's-
it's amazing the difference between records you can get as an intercountry adoptee. Now, this is I'm not saying you can go to Russia and get all you want, or go to Korea, which is really restrictive in getting records from the foreign adoption agency. But what we have here in the US by simple FOIA is much different than what domestic adoptees can get, which is, I find, fascinating.
Greg, this has been so illuminating. It is almost 12:15, so we do have to wrap it up for, oh, Kylie, I'm sorry, I see that you have your
Give Kylie-
hand up.
No, I think, Annette, I think you answered my question. I just wanted to make sure. So I am an international adoptee from Russia. And so I wanted to confirm the process of FOIA. So, but I think, Annette, is this the link?
Greg, I put the link just to the USCIS FOIA request. Is that where Kylie would go? And if not, can you get me the appropriate link for Kylie and I'll pass it on to you?
That's probably it. The key to filling out that form is at the very end. It asks what records you want. Make sure you say alien file. And then they give you a little warning. You sure you want the alien file? It's going to take 6 weeks to get. And you say, yes, I really want that, because that's the most valuable part. And then certainly, I do this pro bono all the time. If you need help with a FOIA, just contact me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
because it's the documents that you receive can be, remarkable. And I've seen quite a number of birth certificates from Russian intercountry adoptees. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Greg, truly, thank you so much. This was, even though I work with you on, this and many other issues, this was very enlightening for me as well.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. And,
So we thank